Everything's difficult with him. He's a difficult person, isn't he?
Drew, obviously yesterday, JG talked about how Kyler wasn't going to play in the preseason. I'm curious about the other two guys and the progress they're making, and specifically Clayton, what kind of strides has he made since last year?
Yeah, I think this preseason is going to be a great opportunity for those guys to get a lot of reps, put themselves on tape, go out and compete, and show what they can do. I think they've worked really hard in the spring and throughout training camp to be ready for that. And, certainly the decision with Kyler is always going to come down to what we feel like is best for the team, and excited to see those guys play. And then I think the second part was about Clayton specifically. I think certainly in year two, there's a lot of things that aren't new. He's coming into a building that he's familiar with, teammates he's familiar with, a system that he knows, so he can focus on some of the finer points of playing quarterback. And I think we've seen that throughout the offseason and camp, and looking forward for him to put that display here Saturday.
When you look at the competition between him and Desmond, what are you looking for as far as who will take the lead there, like how they command the offense, whether they move the ball down the field, plays in certain situations, etc.?
Combination of all those things. I think at the end of the day, that's playing the quarterback position. It's operating the offense at a high level, taking care of the football, and giving us the opportunity to score points. So it's going to be all those things. I think the big thing in a preseason game, there's some things that are exactly like an NFL regular season game, and there's some things that aren't, and that's real. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to be on decision making and operation, kind of the big 2 points that we're going to stick on. But it's going to take a look at the whole picture over here the next couple weeks to really make that final decision.
How much do you take into consideration who they're playing with? Because in the regular season, Kyler goes down. One of those guys will be in with the first team. So how much do you kind of look at that?
I think you take it into account, but kind of to the earlier question, that's why we don't strictly base it on production. Because there's so many other factors that go into playing the position at a high level that we're going to make sure we evaluate off the tape. And some of that's going to be from games, some of that's going to be from practice. So I think everything that we do, we have to evaluate in that way to make sure we're making the best decision for the team.
At left guard, how do you assess that competition right now?
I think it's very open. I think that entire group, I think we've had a lot of guys playing that role. Certainly Yelda missed a little time last week. So excited just to see those guys go out and compete on game day. We're going to mix in match the lineups here a little bit, depending on who's playing on Saturday. So, it's the first time people can get tackled. So it's like, hey, he might have made that tackle. You might have made that block. Now we get to finalize some of those conversations and really see what guys can do.
What did you see from Evan in Pro's absence when he had to kind of fill in that center?
Didn't miss a beat. Jumped in there mentally, handled all the responsibilities of multiple positions, which I think he's done throughout his career. If you look at his body of work, played center last year, before that was a guard in Detroit. So he's done both. I think he's very comfortable in both. And I think we saw that. Whether it was the day, the play after Yelda had to step out or the next day, whatever we ask him to do, he does it to the best of his ability, which is great.
How do you judge those guys in camp when, as you said, you can't tackle the running back? What are you looking for with the offensive lineman?
No, I think there's a number of different things. Certainly the one-on-one pass pro is pretty real. They're not going to sack the quarterback, but you can tell when a guy wins or loses a rep. In the run game, there's a multitude of things that we're asking them to do. It's different schemes, one-on-one blocks, combination blocks. So it's a combination of scheme, pad level. And look, when the pads are on, we can generate some movement in the run game and win some one-on-ones in the pass game. So I think that all of that goes into the evaluation process.
That left guard to get chemistry with Paris and then Yelda, would you like to make that decision sooner than later?
No, I don't think there's really a timeline on it. I think, the nice part specifically with those two guys you just talked about is they're very smart and they're great communicators. So regardless who's in that position, I think that's going to continue because the guys on each side of them play at a pretty high level mentally, which certainly that's a concern if you're rotating a lot of guys through the lineup. But I think we've really placed a priority in that group in general on, high mental aptitude and the ability to do those things. And it allows us to mix and match and make sure that we do what's best for the team.
You evaluated Amari's camp and all the different things that he's shown he's capable of doing back there. Yeah,
certainly camp's a big part of that. I think what he did on tape last year speaks to a lot of what he's capable of. So was excited to see him, get going here in camp. I think he picked up where he left off, which is great to see. Fully expected that. And then I think, for that running back position, certainly ball carrying takes a little bit of a different element here in preseason games, which is a little bit of a nice change.
You talked about, when guys have the pads on, you can really evaluate. How valuable is it to have a game like this where the plays are being finished and it's a different team and when it comes to the evaluation process?
I think it's huge. I think there's as you said, the pads are on, we're finishing plays. I think the other thing is you're going against some unknowns now. In practice, the personnel, you have a feel for the scheme, you're getting a lot of similar looks at times. All of a sudden it's a new scheme, a new person. You haven't studied them or played against them for 4 months now. So watching guys react on the fly to some different looks and some different personnel, I think is good.
As a rookie, what could Marvin benefit if he plays on the side?
I think, again, and always we're going to do what's best for the team, whether he's out there or not. But certainly, if he's out there, I think there's the opportunity to get a feel for NFL game speed. Again, to look at some different people who he hasn't gone against every day, and maybe some different leverage, some different coverages that, oh, hey, that's what that looks like. Hey, haven't seen that from our defense. There's a benefit to that. Do I think he needs that to go out and be successful? I think he would speak to that better than me. But ultimately, we'll have those conversations here over the next couple of days, and make that decision from there.
Any aspect of that decision with Marvin related on who the quarterbacks will be, since Kyler won't be playing?
Ultimately, no. I think every person that we do or do not play in the game, and this is going to be true for the rest of training camp, is going to be based on what we feel like is ultimately best for the Arizona Cardinals, coupled with that person individually. I don't think who's around them makes a big difference in that product.
With expectations that Marv will get a lot of attention week one and first part of the season from the defense. What's your hope that how the other receivers can kind of play off of that? What can they
Yeah, I think the message has been pretty consistent, and I do think this is extremely important. Our success is the number one thing for all those guys: just do your job at a high level. Whatever we're asking you to do, whether it's run this route, block this run, decoy over here, do this, and whatever it might be. I think at the end of the day, they can't be focused on what the defense is taking away, who the ball is going to do. Like, that's our job as coaches. They have to be focused on, this is what my assignment is, how do I do it to the best of my ability, coupled with the guys that I'm going against each week. And I think the guys that we have really committed themselves to that.
the flip side of that, where he might attract so much attention, might open up everything for those guys.
Yeah, and then again, with their numbers called, they got to go make those plays. So I think that's where I try to make sure that they're not worried about that or thinking about that, because it takes away from them focusing on their job. I think that's really critical.
We hear a lot about the vanilla way that preseason games are called, offensively and defensively. So as a coordinator, what do you get out of these games yourself if you're not necessarily game planning heavily or going deep into the bag or whatever it might be? Like, what are you getting out of this?
I think as a coach, you still get that mindset of, like, you got to make the next call, you got to deal with the next situation as those things change throughout the game, which is probably one of the biggest roles as a play caller. It's easy when exactly what I expect to happen is happening and we're rolling on the call sheet and I'm just getting every call out that I want. But the reality of an NFL game is something you call goes a way you didn't expect it to, good or bad. And you have to be able to process quickly, talk, communicate to the staff, make sure the right personnel is on the field. So I think you get to work on a lot of that throughout training camp, even if you're not necessarily at the level of complexity in the play call. I think the process is very similar.
The receivers, you're talking about for them just focusing on what they need to do, but as a coach, how do you feel like Marv and Michael, as the two outside receivers, complement each other kind of in terms of their skill sets?
I think that, there's a lot that they're similar. They're both bigger players who move well, who change direction well, who have impressive ball skills. They're good route runners. I think they understand and study the game really well. So in a lot of ways, they're similar players. And, the nice part to me is both of them move around the formation. Like, you've seen them in the slot here in camp. You saw them do that throughout their college careers. So would certainly expect that to continue. And I think that's what makes them difficult and dynamic.
What do you see as the next step for Michael here in year two with, being fully healthy now?
Yeah, I think as you said on it, and I know we've hit this with some other players, but I think it's that consistency of staying in the lineup consistently health-wise and then going out and making plays day in and day out. What we try not to avoid, but like what you don't want to see is, hey, you have a great game and then you disappear for a game. You have two, then you have one. We're going to really stress with him and a lot of the guys on, like, hey, can we just be that every single week, day in and day out, so that we know what to expect and you can continue to do it at a high level.
Harder for him, given how few football reps he's actually, his last 3 years of college played 13 games or something. Last year was injured.
He would be able to speak to the health and how he takes care of his body a lot better than I would be. But, I think ultimately the thing that makes that hard in the NFL is the level of talent that is in the league as a whole. You're going against great players day in and day out, great schemes, really good coaches. So I think that's what makes that consistency hard, not necessarily anything he is or is not doing. More, it's just the consistency of going out and doing it against great players.
How much growth have you seen from Greg Dortch this summer, especially compared to last year at this time, not knowing a whole lot about him?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's been great with Greg is just his understanding of the offense. I think he was one of those guys. It was a big shift for him early in his career on changing systems, learning a new language, especially as sometimes the 3, 4, or 5 receiver, you don't know which position you're going in the game in. That puts a lot on you mentally. And I think he's really taken the offseason to embrace and learn that, so that now when he's numbers called, whether it's at this position or that position, there's no thought process. Kind of like we talked about Kyler at quarterback. He's going out there and playing and letting his physical tools take over. He's not thinking about assignments as much anymore, which has been good to see.
Do you think he seems to be one of those guys that just seems to make things happen when he's on the field.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's why he's continued to earn more of a role in this offense and on this team, and both, really on special teams and in the offense. As you said, we're looking for guys that when their numbers are called make plays, and I think he's been able to do that a number of times. So we want to continue to give him those opportunities.
How have you seen Tip Ryman evolve as a pass catcher? We know about the run blocking skills, but one of the knocks about him during the draft process was the fact that he wasn't active in Illinois' passing scheme. So how have you seen him integrate himself in the passing game?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that could be just what they were doing and how they used him and what his skill set is based on who their roster was. I think, certainly I think where he excels in the pass game is that size and catch radius. He's one of those guys that's open when he's not. I think he has some good short area movement skills that allow him to get body position and put himself in a position to be successful. And one of the things we're working on him with is just understanding how that relates to coverage and who might be covering you. Because again, if you do that a couple times, it's not always going to be the linebacker that's covering you. It's not always going to be the safety. They're going to change up some of those looks. And I think he's done a good job of embracing that and certainly need that to continue.
Does he enable you to do new things out of 12 personnel that you weren't able to do last year?
Yes and no. I think certainly his skill set is maybe different than Trey or Elijah, but obviously had Jeff Swaim here last year who worked in a similar role. So, Jeff might have done some things better than Tip and vice versa. So, I think a lot of that will dig, I don't want to tell you all that right now before we go play a meaningful game. But no, I think at the end of the day, the offense isn't going to change drastically with him on or off the field based on the way it looked last year.
How valuable is a guy like Spencer Whipple been just being a holdover from the previous regime and being able to work with many position groups?
It's been awesome. I think, as you said it, and one of the big things, and people did this for me as a young coach, was move you around into different rooms and grow your understanding of the game, while also allowing you to provide a different insight in the tight end room when you come from the receiver room or when you've left the quarterback room. And, we tried to do that this offseason to move some of those guys around to give them that experience, because I do feel like that was so valuable for me early in my career. And he's just embodied that, embraced that, asked great questions, is really engaged, and provides a ton of insight and knowledge to me, not only for us as an offense, but, as we start to get into the season and defensive opponents and things like that.
Kyler not playing at all this preseason, could he do any kind of play calling over the next 3 games?
It's something we haven't talked about directly. If he wanted to, we would have that conversation. I have no issue with that. But no, at this point, I don't see that happening.
What is standing out about him in camp?
About Kyler, I think his command of the offense, and I think his competitiveness you see. He's the type of guy, if he misses one throw in RVAs, it eats at him for about 10 or 15 minutes. He wants to be perfect. He wants everything to work, and realistically, the game of football is not that way, and probably never will be that way, unfortunately. I really wish it was. But I think those two things probably stand out to me more than anything, and it's certainly, I think, one of the many reasons that he's able to be successful.
The chance this is the last time we talked to you before Indy, just for that week, what do you get from your offense when you're going up against first-team defense that you might not get from a preseason game if your opponent isn't Austin Langston?
Yeah, I think those practices are really valuable. You get a lot of reps, which technically, generally, even if you play some people, they don't get a ton of reps. So you get a lot of reps against ones versus ones, and you get to work on some things that maybe, we talked about the complexity of the game in preseason kind of being simplified a little to let guys go out and compete for roles and show what they can do. I think those practices give you an opportunity to work on some of that more nuanced scheme and some of that variation to see what you like, what people are good at, and how that matches up versus a different front, a different coverage, different personnel.
The fine line where the guys don't want to be make look bad in front of their teammates and things get intense, and a lot of times you see these two teams have a joint practice, kind of see some fights.
Yeah, and that's obviously JG will be able to talk on that more than me. I think my message to the offense is that at the end of the day, doing that type of stuff hurts us. And that's really the focus. If you're going to put yourself ahead of the team to do those type of things, we got to reevaluate why you're making that decision. I think that's really the focus going into a lot of these practices against other people. I've been a part of them, probably over 6-7 times throughout my career here in the NFL. And, for the most part, it's gone very clean. But I think that mentality has to be stressed from the top down. And if we're allowing it to happen on the field, we certainly got to stay out in front of that and address that and then stop it quickly if it starts to show up.
For Kyler, is that as important or maybe even more than preseason game, getting the work that he'll get next week against the Colts in a controlled environment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a huge part of it. Some of that nuance, some of those new plays, some of the new scheme, a new coverage. I think certainly we're going to stress and work, really hard to have competitive practices and make sure we're getting something out of it. I think that's going to be really beneficial for him and really all those guys that participate in those.
Thanks, Coach.
Thanks a lot, guys. Which one?